All right, so this next chapter that we're going to go over, a little bit out of order, is Chapter 18. Chapter 18 has to deal with conservation of biodiversity, and the first half looks at the loss of biodiversity, um, or the sixth mass extinction, which many scientists believe we are in. So if we look back to Chapter 5, we've already discussed this, but it's good to have a reminder that there have been 5 mass extinctions, one, two, three, four, five, as far as we know on the planet. The last one being the most notorious one, which is the extinction of the dinosaurs, which was good for us because it freed up space for mammals to evolve. Um, so there have been 5 previous mass extinctions, but many scientists believe that we are now in the 6th mass extinction. Some data that supports this: we are experiencing the loss of about 50,000 species, or 50,000 species are becoming extinct every year. This is an extremely quick rate, which rivals that of the dinosaur extinction. Um, Depending on the estimate, even at the low rate, the rate of decline is about 100 times faster in the last 50 years than at any other time in human history. And at the high end, it's about 1,000 times faster in the last 50 years than any other time in human history. Some things that make this unique: this is the first mass extinction event we have seen with humans being on the planet. And not only that, but it's accepted by scientists that the extinction is human-derived. This is E.O. Wilson. He is a very famous biologist, probably the most prominent biologist of our time, and he makes an interesting point. He says, if all mankind were to disappear, the world would generate back to the rich state of equilibrium that existed 10,000 years ago. If insects were to vanish, the environment would collapse into chaos. So a couple things he's acknowledging here. One is that humans have caused a loss of biodiversity. He makes that point by saying if we were to be gone, then the steady state that we would be considered a kind of a healthy ecosystem would come back. He also makes a point that maybe some of the smallest creatures that we don't really consider to be that important, insects, are in fact so important that without them we would be thrown into chaos, basically because of the fact of the roles that insects play in pest control, as food for other organisms, as mainly as pollinators for many plant species all over the world. It's just an interesting take on the idea of the role of humans, of what we're playing in the ecosystem right now. So the loss of biodiversity leads to a couple of different major issues. One major issue that we can focus on is the decline in genetic diversity and inbreeding depression. So if we look at kind of conservation on its lowest level, at the genetic level, as opposed to the individual species, population, community, or ecosystem level, if we look at it on the kind of smallest scale level, the genetic level, there's some major concerns with loss of biodiversity at the genetic level. If a species population declines to the point where they are experiencing an inbreeding depression, which is when individuals of similar genetic relatedness breed with each other, the genetic diversity is so low that the offspring that's produced by this are not able to adapt to a changing environment. So low genetic diversity means the species is not able to adapt to a changing environment. And an inbreeding depression is when individuals with similar genetic code or relatives breed with each other to produce offspring with the impaired ability to survive and reproduce. Inbreeding decreases genetic diversity and increases the chance of harmful genetic mutations. So contrast that with high genetic diversity, which creates a species that can adapt to environmental changes due to a wide range of phenotypes. An example that hits close to home is the Florida panther. The Florida panther was in such decline that they were experiencing inbreeding depression, and the individuals that were produced by this inbreeding had phenotypes that were indicative of kind of an unhealthy genetic pool. There were kinky tails, but beyond that, they were a lot of the offspring produced this way were not able to survive into reproduction, so it was accelerating the rate of extinction for the Florida panther. Luckily, some concerned scientists started a captive breeding program in which they brought in mountain lions from out west to breed with the Florida panthers under controlled circumstances, and they were able to boost the Florida panther population back up. And right now they're in the middle of recovery. Not only are we concerned about low genetic diversity in wild populations, but we are concerned about low genetic diversity in populations that humans directly depend on. These are populations of livestock, and these are populations of crops. This right here, this is showing us the genetic diversity of livestock. Over thousands of years, humans have selected for numerous breeds of domesticated animals to thrive in local climatic conditions to resist diseases common in their local environments. But modern breeding, which focuses on productivity, has caused the decline and extinction of many of these animal breeds. So Texas Longhorn, Holstein breeds are still around, but a lot of these very specialized breeds have gone away. So the UN estimates that that most of our livestock species come from just 7 species of mammals. These include donkey, buffalo, cattle, goats, horses, pigs, and sheep. Just 4 avian species make up what's left: chickens, ducks, geese, and turkeys. And as I mentioned earlier, livestock producers use inbreeding to produce desired characteristics to make animals super fat and tasty, thus decreasing the overall genetic diversity of the few livestock species that are left. Some statistics: a half of the breeds of livestock that once existed in 1900 in Europe are now extinct. 43% of those livestock breeds that are left are endangered. In North America, over 80% of all livestock species that have existed in North America are in decline or facing extinction. The same scenario is playing out with plants. For example, out of the 8,000 varieties of apples available in the turn of the 20th century, only 100 varieties are left. We humans as a species are so worried about this that we have set up a global seed vault in an effort to conserve crop diversity. This picture is taken from the Svalbard Global Seed Vault, which basically keeps seeds in cold storage in case we lose these crop varieties and we depend on them and we need them again. So we rank species in decline. The categories that we rank them in: number 1 is data deficient, meaning we don't know. Number 2 is extinct, meaning no more left. Another way to put this is that it would take another round of creation to have these species back in existence. It's kind of a different way to think of extinction. Next level is endangered, meaning that these creatures are about to go extinct if they're left on their current course. Threatened is the risk of becoming endangered. Near threatened is likely to become threatened in the future, and least concern means, as far as we know, they are doing fine. Most species are listed as data deficient. Out of all the species, from bacteria to whales, only 50,000 of the 10 million species that exist on planet Earth, only 50,000 have been evaluated. Why is this a big deal? Well, as we talked about way in the beginning of first semester, declines in biodiversity means declines in ecosystem services. Of the 24 ecosystem services identified, 15 were found to be in decline by the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment done in 2006, which got scientists from all over the world to assess our ecosystem services. So we depend on these services. These services depend on biodiversity. So what causes declines in biodiversity? One of the things is habitat loss. This is the spotted owl, and the spotted owl lives in the northwestern United States. They need old growth hardwood forest, and this is what most of old growth hardwood forests look like nowadays. We have harvested them for lumber. So without the proper habitat, the species cannot produce offspring. Their population declines. The Millennium Ecosystem Assessment also looked at different biomes and the rate of their decline, and they found that up to 70% of the Mediterranean woodland shrubland biome has been lost. Also, across the globe, over 50% of all grasslands have been lost. So your book concludes this interesting graphic. It shows the percent of, or the increase, decrease, or no change in forest cover. And while forest is an important biome, sometimes the increase in forest means loss in grasslands, and that's what we see a lot. So in many areas, we do have, especially in the U.S., right, we have an increase in forest cover. But a lot of times this increase in forest cover, especially in the plains regions, means loss in grassland habitat or loss in early successionary habitat. Additionally, forests in the U.S. a lot of times are grown with one tree in particular, and that instead of a bunch of different trees. And even though it's a forest is recovering and we have more trees now than we used to, since the forest doesn't have that many species, it is low in biodiversity. And they're managed for one species, usually just for timber. As you can see, in many parts of the world, in the Amazon, decrease in forest cover, and in other areas in the Congo, we have a decrease in forest cover as well. Not only are a lot of terrestrial biomes are in decline, but marine biomes are also in decline. Coral provides the most biodiverse habitat found in oceans. Global climate change and ocean acidification associated with high amounts of CO2 creating carbonic acid has caused coral cover to decline. Another reason for a decline in biodiversity is invasive species. Invasive species are species that have not evolved in the ecosystem but have been introduced. So there's native species, which species that have lived in their historical range, and then there's alien species or exotic species, that's species that are living outside their historical range. If those species cause environmental or economic damage, we call those species invasive species. Now, invasive species we've seen a steady increase in the amount of invasive species prevalent in ecosystems across the world. This graph is including the Nordic countries. The reason why invasive species are so difficult is because they reproduce really quickly. They have lots of offspring, they have short gestation periods, and they have no natural predators. All those characteristics combine to make them particularly dreadful in ecosystems. So this is an example of kudzu. Kudzu is a plant that was brought in for cattle forage and erosion control, and it just takes over. And if it takes over, that means nothing else can survive here, and all the species that evolved to live where this kudzu is growing can no longer survive. Kudzu is very prevalent throughout the southeast and up into North Florida. And then another cause of species decline is overharvesting. Perhaps one of the most famous examples is the dodo bird off of the Mauritius Islands. These birds evolved not in the presence of very many predators. They were big and fat and tasty, and they are now off the face of the earth. Another horror story in terms of overharvesting comes from the passenger pigeon. Their migration used to blot out the sun, and market hunters, or hunters that would sell birds for feathers or for meat, wiped them all out. And the last one died in captivity in 1914 in the Cincinnati Zoo. So a lot of people see a species and see tons of them and think, oh, there's no way they could ever go extinct, but the passenger pigeon is one example of just that. One of the most populous birds in the entire United States now no longer exists. However, there are some success stories. One is the bison, almost wiped out when we were settling the West, and now there are so many of them that you can actually buy bison in stores and order bison burgers in restaurants. Alligator is another one. It was actually placed on the endangered species list when the Endangered Species Act came out in 1972, and now there's so many of them that there's a legal hunting season on them as well. So I would bet you a lot of people who grew up in Florida would never have guessed that the American alligator was once listed as an endangered species. So there are some success stories. And then last but not least, pollution. Pollution can cause species to decline. The effects of the BP Horizon oil spill are still being seen and felt by wild species, especially birds, and can lead to overall decline. Oh, sorry, last but not least is climate change. We have a whole chapter on climate change that we'll be getting to, but climate change has also resulted in the inability of species to migrate or adapt to the changing environment and has caused a decline as well. So I hope you pay attention to this, and please ask me if you have any questions. Thanks.